Chapter 107 of Consuelo by George Sand. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Consuelo by George Sand. Conclusion. Consuelo, finding herself at perfect liberty, passed the day in wandering about the chateau, the garden, and the environs, in order to revisit all the places that recalled to her Albert's love. She even allowed her pious fervour to carry her as far as the Schreckenstein, and seated herself upon the stone in that rightful solitude which Albert had so long filled with his grief. But she soon retired, feeling her courage fail her, and almost imagining that she heard a hollow groan issuing from the bowels of the rock. She dared not admit even to herself that she heard it distinctly. Albert and Zdenko were no more, and the illusion, therefore, for it was plainly such, could not prove otherwise than hurtful and enervating. Consuelo hurriedly left the spot. On returning to the chateau towards evening, she saw the Baron Frederick, who had by degrees strengthened himself on his legs, and had regained some animation in the pursuit of his favourite amusement. The huntsman who accompanied him started the game, and the Baron, whose skill had not deserted him, picked up his victims with a deep sigh. He, at least, will live to be consoled, thought the young widow. The canoness supped, or pretended to sup, in her brother's chamber. The chaplain, who had been praying beside the dead body in the chapel, endeavoured to join them in their evening meal, but he felt feverish and ill, and after the first few mouthfuls was obliged to desist. This provoked the doctor a good deal. He was hungry, and, now compelled to let his soup cool in order to conduct the chaplain to his chamber, he could not help exclaiming, "These people have no strength or courage. There are only two men here, the canoness and the signora." He soon returned, resolved not to trouble himself much about the indisposition of the poor priest, and made a hearty supper, in which he was imitated by the Baron. Porpora, deeply affected, though he did not display it, could not unclose his lips either to speak or to eat. Consuelo's thoughts were occupied with the last repast she had made at that table between Albert and Anzoletto. After supper she proceeded along with her master to make the necessary preparations for her departure. The horses were ordered to be in readiness at 4 in the morning. Before separating for the night, she repaired to Count Christian's apartment. He slept tranquilly, and Supperville, who wished to quit the dreary abode, asserted that he had no longer any remains of fever. "Is that perfectly certain, sir?" said Consuelo, who was shocked at his precipitation. "I assure you," said he, "it is so. He is saved for the present, but I must warn you that it will not be long. At his time of life, grief is not so deeply felt at the crisis, but the enemy merely gives way, to return with greater force afterward. So be on the watch, or you are not surely serious in determining to surrender your rights." "I am perfectly serious, sir," said Consuelo, "and I am astonished that you do not believe in so simple a matter." "Permit me to doubt, madame, until the death of your father-in-law. Meantime, you have made a great mistake in not taking possession of the jewels and title deeds. No matter, you have doubtless your reasons, which I do not seek to know. For a person so calm as you are does not act without motives. I have given my word of honour not to disclose this family secret, and I shall keep my promise till you release me from it. My testimony may be of service to you when the proper time comes, and you may rely on my zeal and friendship. You will always find me at Brize, if alive. And in this hope, Countess, I kiss your hand." Supperville took his leave of the Canoness, and, having assured her of his patient's safety, written a prescription, and received a large fee, small, however, he trusted, in comparison with that which he was to receive from Consuelo, and quitted the castle at 10 o'clock, leaving the latter indignant at his sordidness. The Baron retired to rest better than he had been the night before. As for the Canoness, she had a bed prepared for herself beside Count Christian's. Consuelo waited till all was still. Then, when 12 o'clock struck, she lighted a lamp and repaired to the chapel. At the end of the cloister she found 2 of the servants, who at first were frightened at her approach, but afterward confessed why they were there. Their duty was to watch a part of the night beside the young Count's remains, but they were afraid and preferred watching and praying outside the door. "And why afraid?" asked Consuelo, mortified to find that so generous a master inspired only such sentiment in the breast of his attendants. "What would you have, Signora?" replied one of the men, unaware that he was addressing Count Albert's widow. "Our young lord had mysterious relations and strange acquaintances among the world of spirits. He conversed with the dead, he found out hidden things, never went to church, ate and drank with the gypsies. In short, no one could say what might happen to anyone who would pass the night in this chapel. It would be as much as our lives were worth. Look at Cinnabre there. They would not let him into the chapel, and he has lain all day long before the door without moving, without eating, without making the least noise. He knows very well that his master is dead, for he has never called him once, but since midnight has struck, see how restless he is, how he smells and whines, as if he was aware that his master was no longer alone." "You are weak fools," replied the indignant Consuelo. "If your hearts were warmer, your minds would not be so feeble." And she entered the chapel, to the surprise and consternation of the timid domestics. Albert lay on a couch covered with brocade, with the family escutcheons embroidered at the corners. His head reposed on a black velvet cushion sprinkled with silver tears, while a black velvet pall fell in sable folds around him. A triple row of waxen tapers lit up his pale face, which was so calm, so pure, so manly, that a spectator would have said that he slept peacefully. The last of the Redulstads was clothed, according to family custom, in the ancient costume of his fathers. The coronet of a count was on his head, a sword was by his side, a buckler at his feet, and a crucifix on his breast. With his long black hair and beard, he seemed one of the ancient warriors whose effigies lay thickly scattered around. The pavement was strewn with flowers, and the perfumes burned slowly in silver censers placed at each corner of his last sad resting place. During 3 hours Consuelo prayed for her husband and contemplated him in his sublime repose. Death, in spreading a graver shade over his features, had altered them so little that often, admiring his beauty, she forgot that he had ceased to live. She even imagined that she heard the sound of his respiration, and when she withdrew for an instant to renew the perfume of the censers and trim the flames of the tapers, it seemed to her that she heard slight rustlings and perceived almost imperceptible undulations in the curtains and draperies. She reapproached him immediately, but on perceiving his frozen lips and silent heart, she renounced her fleeting and insensate hopes. When 3 o'clock struck, Consuelo rose and pressed upon the lips of her spouse her first kiss of love. Adieu, Albert, she said aloud, carried away by her religious enthusiasm. You can now read without uncertainty all the emotions of my heart. There is no longer a cloud between us, and you know how I love you. You know that if I abandon your precious remains to the care of the family who tomorrow will return and look upon you with calmness, I shall not the less remember you and your unfaltering love forever. You know that it is not a heedless widow, but a faithful wife that leaves your last abode, and that she shall never cease to bear your memory in her heart. Adieu, Albert. As you have said, death severs us in seeming only, and we shall meet again in eternity. Faithful to the convictions which you have implanted in me, certain that you have merited God's blessing and approval, I weep not for you, and nothing will present you before my thoughts under the false and cruel image of death. You were right, Albert. I feel it in my heart where I shall ever love you. There is no real death. As Consuelo finished these words, the curtains behind the bier were perceptibly moved, and suddenly opening, presented to view the pale features of Zdenko. She was terrified at first, accustomed as she was to look upon him as her mortal enemy, but there was an expression of gentleness in his eyes which reassured her, and, stretching over the bed of death a rough hand which she did not hesitate to grasp in hers, he exclaimed with a smile, "Let us be at peace, my poor girl, here by his bed of rest. You are the good child of God, and Albert is well pleased with you. Ah, he is happy now. Albert sleeps well. I have pardoned him, as you see. When I learned that he slept, I came, and now I shall never leave him more. Tomorrow I shall bring him to the grotto, and there we shall still converse about Consuelo de mi alma. Rest then, my child. Albert is no longer alone. Zdenko is there, always there. He wants nothing more. His friend will provide for him. The misfortune is averted, evil is destroyed, death is overcome. The thrice glorious day has risen. May he whom they have wronged salute you." Consuelo could support no longer this poor fool's childish joy. She bade him a tender adieu, and when she opened the chapel door, she allowed Cinabre to enter and bound forward towards his old friend, whom, with his unerring instinct, he had already long perceived. "Poor Cinabre, come, come, I shall hide you under my master's couch," said Zdenko, caressing him as he spoke with as much tenderness as if he had been his own child. "Come, my Cinabre, we are all three once more united, and shall never be separated again." Consuelo hastened to awake Porpora, and then entered on tiptoe into Count Christian's apartment, and glided between his bed and that of the canoness. "It is you, my daughter," said the old man, without evincing any surprise. "I am happy to see you. Do not waken my sister, who sleeps well, thank God. Go and do likewise. I feel quite easy. My son is saved, and I shall soon be well." Consuelo kissed his white hair and his wrinkled hands, and succeeded in stifling her tears, which would perhaps have dissipated his illusion. She dared not disturb the canoness, who reposed at last after watching for 30 nights. God, she thought, has placed bounds to grief, even in its paroxysm. May the rest of these unhappy souls be long. Half an hour afterwards, Consuelo, who felt her heart wrung with grief on leaving these noble-minded friends, crossed the drawbridge of the castle with Porpora without once recollecting that the frowning stronghold, whose moats and bars enclosed such riches and such suffering, had become the property of the Countess of Rudolfstadt. The End. End of chapter 107. Recording by Alan Mapstone. End of Consuelo by George Sand.